The question is that the bill be now read the second time. The honourable member for Nelson.
Thank you, Mr President. And I'm very pleased to rise to speak on this Police Offences Amendment Begging Repeal Bill brought by the Tasmanian Greens to the Parliament, and I thank the Greens for progressing the bill, persistently progressing the bill over an extended period of time, and the member for Hobart who's had carriage of it here in this place today. And like others, I rise with a very strong sense of déjà vu, Mr President, because of course we're revisiting the effort made in this Parliament in 2019/20 across the two chambers to legislate the very thing we're now advancing, the decriminalisation of begging. 4 years ago, our state, via this chamber, demonstrated its compassionate and commitment to evidence-based policy and legislation when the government's legislation to repeal begging was passed, appropriately amended to ensure that the hypocritical, unnecessary, unwarranted and discriminatory expansion of police move-on powers was removed from that bill. 4 years ago, Tasmania could have been at the head of the pack nationally, and we've missed that opportunity. Happily, although delayed, we've now a chance to bring Tasmania into line with WA, with New South Wales, with ACT, and we know that Queensland and Victoria are also moving actively in that same direction, with reviews in those jurisdictions recommending similar decriminalisation of begging and similar sorts of public space offences that are now regarded as inappropriate and out of date. Mr President, when we dealt with the government's bill in 2020, I spoke in detail on this same topic, and no doubt today, speaking on this Greens bill, I will be echoing some similar sentiments, although I intend to make a fairly succinct contribution. Put simply, there is no one in a modern context with a modern understanding of effective criminal justice policy and social policy who would make the case to criminalise the act of begging. That's because to criminalise begging is to criminalise poverty and those that experience it. It's a straightforward matter, Mr President, that it should not be criminal for one person to ask another person for money in a time of need. The fact that members of our community engage in begging is an indication of social exclusion that merits attention. Those that work with people experiencing poverty and homelessness around Australia, and in that I include NGOs, charities, researchers, legal practitioners, academics and the like, all agree that criminalising the act of begging does nothing to address the underlying causes of disadvantage. In fact, it compounds them. Instead, it perpetuates the stigmatisation of poverty, of homelessness and of disadvantage. Causes of begging are complex and include systemic societal issues that are beyond the control of an individual. Many who find themselves in situations where they need to beg never planned nor expected to be there and would prefer not to be in that situation. People who beg are frequently victims of past trauma, of crime, of economic deprivation and of social exclusion more broadly. It's often assumed that those who beg must be homeless. However, research in this and other states in recent times has been examining the circumstances of people who are engaging in begging, and it shows that begging is most often born of necessity rather than just from homelessness. As described in the briefing paper provided by the Community Legal Centres, Tasmania, Anglicare Tasmania, St Vincent de Paul, Shelter Tasmania, Tasmania Aboriginal Centre, TasCos, Australian Lawyers Alliance and the Prisoners Legal Service. Begging is an action of last resort, meaning that people beg out of necessity rather than resorting to more serious criminal offences such as stealing, drug dealing or prostitution. With this bill, we are removing an offence from our statute books that targets and criminalises some of the most deprived and most disadvantaged members of our society. Mr President, who are in a position of desperation and should receive not criminalisation but support. That support should include affordable, secure housing, a social safety net that is adequate, accessible medical and mental health services, alcohol and drug services where necessary, and social support. On these measures of support in this state, we are falling well short, Mr President. Criminalising people in circumstances, punishing them with fines while failing to meet their needs is quite frankly perverse and does nothing to make our community safer, more cohesive, kinder, more successful or more prosperous. Whenever we act to increase social polarisation and socio-economic divides, we act against the interests of the whole community. Even those who are most privileged amongst us do worse when divisions are made greater. So this bill is an opportunity to remove one clear example from our legal framework which increases division in our community while doing nothing to make our community stronger. Evidence tells us substantially the activity of begging is one carried out in a way that is relatively passive and not accompanied generally by problematic or aggressive behaviours. That being said, my observation would be that it is common for people to feel uncomfortable about the presence of begging, even when it is a simple, passive, non-invasive action. I think many people would prefer not to have to see or encounter people experiencing destitution in public streets and public spaces. I acknowledge those feelings are there in the community and believe it's our job to ensure those feelings are addressed effectively based on evidence and based on fairness and compassion. Mr President, it appears there may be an amendment brought by the government to this bill should we progress to the committee stage. As other members have commented, we do not necessarily need to go into detail on that amendment at this point in time if it's brought. And quite frankly, I hope it's not, Mr President, but if it is, we will be able to address it then. May I just make a couple of brief comments on it? Part of that amendment, which I would like to see brought, quite frankly, is a review of this after a period of time. And actually that would be potentially a useful thing. I think it would disprove the need for the other aspects of what is in that proposed amendment, which is to expand police powers. And it expands police powers in a way that isn't necessarily pegged to begging, which I think is problematic. We should have a full and comprehensive conversation and public consultation anytime there is a proposition to expand police powers. And tacking an amendment onto this bill that broadly, in terms of it applies to all members of the public, expands police powers to move people on, is not appropriate to do as an abrupt amendment to a completely different bill. It's not appropriate to do it without proper consultation with stakeholders, and that's why I hope that we do not have to deal with it in committee stage of this bill should we get there. Certainly it makes no sense to me to be decriminalising begging, which is something we apparently all agree on with the one hand, and then with the other hand, apparently we still have to provide police with powers to move people on who are begging. And doing so in a way that is simply passive and stationary and causing no problem. That is, of course, hypocritical, Mr President. And so no doubt there will be more to say on that at the time that it may come to us as an amendment. As I said, I hope we actually just see the part of the amendment that relates to review. That would be informative, I think, going forward. If the government do ever want to progress the other elements of that expansion of police powers in terms of the move-on powers in our Police Offences Act. So I'm going to leave it there for this contribution, Mr President, knowing that should that amendment appear, there'll be plenty more to say on it, I think, from many in the chamber here. Again, thank you to the member for Hobart and the Tasmanian Greens for persisting with this bill. It's a good bill to be doing. It'll be one that, should it pass this place unamended, it will be one we can feel good about going home tonight and feel that we've done a positive thing here today in this chamber and in this Parliament. So I commend the bill.